Title: The Devil's Harvest. The small town of Ravenswood was nestled deep in the heart of rural England. It was a place where time seemed to stand still, where the air was thick with history and tradition. For Emily, James, and Sarah, it was a place where they had grown up, where they had formed their closest bonds. The three friends had always been fascinated by the local library, which was tucked away in a quiet corner of the town. It was a treasure trove of old books, dusty manuscripts, and forgotten knowledge. Emily, a history buff, would spend hours poring over ancient texts on witchcraft and folklore. James, a keen photographer, would capture images of the strange and beautiful artifacts that adorn the shelves. And Sarah, a budding artist, would draw inspiration from the intricate illustrations that adorn the pages. One rainy afternoon, as they were rummaging through the stacks, they stumbled upon an old leather-bound book. It was bound with rusty iron clasps and adorned with strange symbols etched into the cover. The title was written in faded gold lettering, The Devil's Harvest. Emily's eyes lit up as she pulled out the book. "Guys, look at this," she exclaimed. "It's an ancient tome. I've never seen anything like it." James peered over her shoulder, his eyes scanning the pages. "What does it say?" he asked. Sarah sat down beside them, her eyes fixed on the cover. "This is incredible," she breathed. "I've never seen anything like it." As they began to flip through the pages, they discovered that it was a ritual book of some sort. The pages were filled with cryptic symbols and diagrams, along with passages of arcane text. It seemed to be a guide for some sort of dark ritual. "What do you think it is?" Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. James shook his head. "I don't know, but it looks like it's been written in code or something." Sarah frowned. "I don't think it's just code. I think it's trying to tell us something." As they continued to study the book, they began to feel a strange energy emanating from it. It was as if they had stumbled upon something that was meant to remain hidden. "I think we should leave this alone," Emily said finally. "We don't know what we're dealing with here." James nodded in agreement. "Yeah, let's just leave it be." But Sarah was already hooked. She had always been drawn to things that were mysterious and unknown. "I think we should learn more about this," she said softly. "I think we should try to decipher what it's saying." Emily and James exchanged a worried glance. They knew that Sarah was not one to be swayed easily. "Let's just take it back to my place," Sarah said finally. "We can study it further there." And so, despite their reservations, they decided to take the book back to Sarah's house. Little did they know that they were about to unleash a terror beyond their wildest imagination. The night was dark and foreboding, with clouds heavy with rain looming overhead. Sarah's house was dimly lit, the only sound the creaking of the old wooden floorboards beneath their feet. Emily, James, and Sarah huddled around the kitchen table, the book spread out before them. "We need to decipher the ritual," Sarah said, her eyes shining with excitement. "I think it's telling us how to awaken something." Emily frowned. "I don't know, Sarah. This feels like a really bad idea." James shrugged. "We're already in this deep. Let's just try to figure out what it says." Sarah nodded, her fingers tracing the lines of ancient text. "Okay, let's start with the first part. It says we need to gather at the old oak tree in the woods at midnight." Emily raised an eyebrow. "The old oak tree? That's creepy. And what's with the midnight thing?" James leaned in, his voice low. "I think it's trying to tell us something about the timing of the ritual. Maybe it's connected to the moon or something." Sarah nodded, her eyes lighting up. "I think you're right. And look at this, it says we need to bring sacrifices." Emily's eyes widened in alarm. What kind of sacrifices? Sarah shrugged. I don't know, but I think we should just go through with it. We can't turn back now. James nodded reluctantly. Yeah, I guess you're right. Let's just get it over with. As they finished preparing for the ritual, they couldn't shake off the feeling that they were playing with forces beyond their control. The air in the room seemed to grow thick with tension, and they could feel eyes watching them from the shadows. As they made their way to the old oak tree, they noticed that the woods were eerily quiet. The only sound was the rustling of leaves beneath their feet, and they could feel the weight of history bearing down upon them. The old oak tree loomed before them, its branches twisted and gnarled with age. Sarah pulled out a small pouch from her pocket and began to rummage through it. What's that? Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Sarah smiled nervously. Just some tokens. For the ritual. James raised an eyebrow. Tokens? What kind of tokens? Sarah hesitated before answering. Just some small things we found around town. You know, things that might have some significance. As she began to arrange the tokens around the base of the tree, they noticed that the wind had picked up, and the trees seemed to be creaking and groaning in protest. This is crazy, Emily whispered, her eyes darting nervously around the clearing. James nodded in agreement. We should stop this now. But Sarah was already chanting softly, her eyes fixed on the tokens. The words seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once, echoing off the trees. And as they began to chant along with her, they felt a strange energy building around them, an energy that seemed to be drawing them closer to something ancient and malevolent. Little did they know that their actions would unleash a terror beyond their wildest imagination, a terror that would haunt them for eternity. The days passed in a blur of routine, but beneath the surface, something was changing. The crops in the fields were growing at an alarming rate, their vines twisting and curling like snakes. The air was thick with the scent of blooming flowers, and the skies seemed to be painted with a kaleidoscope of colors. Emily, James, and Sarah couldn't shake off the feeling that something was amiss. They would wake up in the morning to find their homes spotless, their clothes folded and hanging in their closets. They would hear strange noises at night, whispers and creaks that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. As they went about their daily routines, they began to notice strange changes in themselves. Emily's eyes seemed to be taking on a yellowish tint, and her skin was developing a strange, papery texture. James's hair was growing longer and darker, and his eyes seemed to be taking on a strange, glassy sheen. Sarah's skin was becoming paler and more translucent, and her eyes seemed to be taking on an unnatural brightness. They tried to brush it off as mere paranoia, but deep down, they knew that something was wrong. The townspeople were acting strangely as well. They would smile and nod at them, their eyes vacant and unfocused. One day, as they were walking through the town square, they saw a group of people gathered around a makeshift altar. The villagers were chanting and swaying to the rhythm of the words, their eyes fixed on something in the center of the altar. What's going on? Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. James shrugged. I don't know, but it looks like some kind of ritual. Sarah nodded. I think it's connected to the ritual we performed under the oak tree. As they watched in horror, the villagers began to offer up sacrifices, small animals and trinkets that seemed to be imbued with a strange, otherworldly energy. The three friends knew that they had to get out of there, fast. They turned and ran, but it was too late. The villagers had already noticed them, and they were coming for them. As they fled through the streets, they could feel the eyes of the villagers upon them, cold, dead eyes that seemed to be devoid of humanity. They knew that they were being hunted by something that was not quite human. And as they ran, they could feel the darkness closing in around them, a darkness that seemed to be drawing them closer to some ancient and malevolent power. The villagers chased them through the streets, their eyes wild and unfocused. Emily, James, and Sarah could feel their breath on their necks, their hands reaching out to grab them. They stumbled and ran, desperate to escape the madness that had taken over the town. But it was no use. The villagers were too numerous, too relentless. They were being driven by some kind of primal urge, some ancient force that was beyond their control. As they ran, they noticed that the streets were growing darker and more twisted. The buildings seemed to be leaning in, as if they were trying to trap them. The air was thick with the scent of decay and corruption. And then, they saw it. A massive, ancient door hidden behind a waterfall. The door was covered in symbols and markings that seemed to pulse with a strange, otherworldly energy. Without hesitation, the three friends burst through the door and found themselves in a dark, damp tunnel. The air was cold and damp, and they could hear the sound of dripping water echoing off the walls. As they descended deeper into the tunnel, they noticed that the walls were covered in strange symbols and markings. They seemed to be some kind of warning, a message from someone who had gone before them. But it was too late. They had already committed themselves to this journey. And as they continued to descend, they could feel the darkness closing in around them, a darkness that seemed to be drawing them closer to some ancient and malevolent power. The tunnel twisted and turned, leading them deeper into the earth. They stumbled and fell, their hearts pounding in their chests. And then, they saw it. A massive, underground chamber filled with strange and wondrous sights. At the center of the chamber stood a massive, stone statue, a statue that seemed to be watching them with cold, dead eyes. The statue was surrounded by a circle of candles, their flames flickering in the darkness. And as they approached the statue, they could feel the energy building around them, an energy that seemed to be drawing them closer to some ancient and malevolent power. As they approached the statue, they could feel the energy building around them. The air was thick with an otherworldly power, and they could sense that they were on the brink of a revelation. Suddenly, the statue began to glow with a soft, blue light. The candles surrounding it flared up, casting an eerie glow over the chamber. And then, the statue began to speak. "You have been chosen," it said in a voice that echoed through the chamber. "You have been chosen to fulfill an ancient prophecy, one that will bring about a new era of darkness and despair." The three friends felt a chill run down their spines as they gazed upon the statue. They knew that they had stumbled into something much larger than themselves, something that threatened to destroy everything they held dear. The statue continued to speak, its words dripping with malevolent intent. "You have been chosen because you possess the power of the harvest. You have been chosen because you are pure of heart, and yet tainted by the corruption of the earth." As the statue spoke, the three friends felt a strange sensation coursing through their veins. They felt their bodies begin to change, their minds clouding with a dark and ancient power. And then, they saw it. A vision of a world consumed by darkness and chaos. A world where the very fabric of reality was torn apart by the forces of evil. The three friends knew that they had to stop this from happening. They knew that they had to find a way to defeat the ancient power that was driving them towards this fate. But as they looked at each other, they knew that it was too late. The power of the harvest was too strong, and they were too far gone. They were consumed by it, body and soul. And so, they stood before the statue, their eyes glowing with an otherworldly energy. They were no longer human, but mere vessels for the dark and ancient power that had consumed them. The statue spoke once more, its voice echoing through the chamber. "The prophecy is fulfilled. The harvest is complete. And soon, the world will be reborn in darkness and despair." And with that, the three friends vanished into the darkness, their fate sealed forever. The town was never seen again. The villagers who remained behind whispered stories of strange occurrences and unexplained events. And as for Emily, James, and Sarah, they were never heard from again. But some say that on certain nights, when the moon is full and the stars are right, you can still hear their whispers echoing through the abandoned streets. Whispers of a dark and ancient power that consumed them, body and soul. And if you listen closely, you can hear the distant sound of a harvest being reaped, a harvest of souls, gathered in for some dark and malevolent purpose.